Okay, so we have started the discussion.
Thanks a lot. Fekadu, I look forward to using the term break now to continue discussions on our paper. Although I'm a co-author there, I'd like to put some question actually to the entire panel, if that's okay. Which is, well, it's two questions, in fact. I mean, against your experience, also your knowledge from your respective country contexts, also having done some research, at least in Tanzania, more recently, and it's on the news, etc., we hear a lot about the price spikes in fertilizers and pesticides, which is a kind of a natural driver almost towards agroecology, you could say. So I'm just asking you openly in terms of what is your observation? Do you have observations in regard to the reactions by farmers on an attitudinal perspective in terms of what are the strategies? Is misery increasing, I suppose? How are they dealing with this? If there's any work on this also. I mean, as a cynical researcher, as an extractivist researcher, this is maybe a research opportunity. I'm not sure. But still, I would just be interested. So in Tanzania, for example, it was then discussed as an opening for organic farming, as I think it is in several countries. And how do you see that? Because that I guess somehow, in fact, such an opening to organic farming also leads to my second question, which is more also to all of you, which is, again, what Zhendao brought up. What is agroecology about? Because organic farming isn't just, I mean, on the field and we use pesticides or not, but there's a lot behind it, no, in terms of the food system, and it's a market-driven mode of production entirely that wants to be rewarded by the market, but only if you secure kind of standards of production. So there's a lot of institutions and complexity and transaction costs behind it. But what I found interesting in your three presentations, one was agroecology, I think, out of necessity. That was the Zimbabwean case almost. It sounded a bit like it. No, we're doing better in the end if we don't if we don't consider the state and if we don't rely on it too much. Another one was very policy driven. Fekadu, that's, I guess, our work. No, what can the state do? And the usual topics: sustainable agriculture and land management and integrated water resource management, and then civil society driven organic agroecology, the presentation by Suwilanji. And so we call all of that agroecology, and I'm asking you three, but also all of us, then is that what we want? So therefore, does it come down to the agronomic practices, and that's the common denominator? Or also politically, maybe, is it wise? Is it strategically smart also to conflate it in this manner, or should we separate? It's an open question. I'm wondering myself, no? But I think we need to take account that of the fact that these are very different things actually that are underneath this, and at least from a research perspective, a lot of qualification would need to be there in order to say, well, actually, these things are rather uncomparable of how they emerge and what that does to people. So thanks.
Okay. I think in terms of the position of the government with respect to fertilizer, I think the government is trying to pursue that farmers can also start using fertilizer with mixing with other type of input like composts and crop residues, and then investing in conservation and so on. This move was started 2 years ago when the fertilizer price was too high, and the government is trying to withdraw provision of subsidies, especially for farmers who are operating on better farms. There is a tendency towards withdrawing subsidy and then focus on farmers that have been operating on land which is very poor. Along this, the government has financed a project which was called Ethiosis. The Ethiosis was trying to do a soil map along the country, characterizing soils, which soils have better potential to use compost and other techniques rather than fertilizer, which farmers should get fertilizer until they lift themselves out of those positions, but at the same time trying to use other types of soil management practices. For example, in the case of productive safety net program, which is targeting very poor farmers, government is providing for free, for example, conservation equipment. And they try to build those conservation structures and retain their soil and retain the moisture rather than continually using fertilizer. But still you find farmers relying on fertilizer because they say that our soil is already bribing us because it requires fertilizer to give yield. So they don't scientifically explain that soil acidity is increasing, there are no microorganisms anymore, and the replenishing soil is very difficult, but they just say, okay, the soil is bribing us and so on. So there is a tendency towards transitioning to sustainable agriculture. That's why I picked this topic. What policies, what options are there in order to move towards sustainable agriculture on a full scale, rather than finding those kind of fragmented practices here and there and so on. Yeah.
Maybe Suwilanji or Vuyisile also have a response.
Yes.
Yes, maybe just to respond to a question and also just to add on what my other colleague has mentioned. I think like he had mentioned, farmers have this perspective, smallholder farmers have this perspective that the soil is already degraded beyond anything to use like local fertilizers rather than external fertilizer input. So and also the policy environment in most of these countries don't support the policy environment has indoctrinated smallholder farmers to think that the only way that they can do farming is through using these chemical inputs. Like for example, it has indoctrinated the use of programs like the FISIP, the Farmer Support Input Program, which is a subsidy. And without it, farmers believe that they cannot do with other, available farming practices. So there is need for knowledge dissemination. There's need for researchers to bridge the gap between what the researchers are finding out and also to communicate with the local farmers out there. So I think that would be my contribution.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Doctor, for the questions. Maybe I'll start with the one where you said on the complexity of the institutions. Okay, on the complexity of the institutions, like you'll find out that Zimbabwe is a different case, so to say. Instead of having synergies and working together, it's not always the case. The government has tried to take responsibility for almost everything because of their interests. So we see that even if there is civil society that is coming maybe with their community capacity building or something, they will try to always block that. And how do they do it? That is when they then implemented this concept of command agriculture. Command agriculture, where they said, okay, we will be the ones who actually gather all the inputs for you because we think they are the ones that are working. And they were working in the sense that most of them were actually given to commercial farmers. And these smallholder farmers would actually be given a bit, and you also have to be supporting the ruling party, of which the side of the community where I was doing my study, they tend not to be in support with the current government. So they'll be like, okay, instead of us depending on them and giving us false hope and something that will be short-term, because that maybe they will come just a few months after elections, they are voted into power, after that they are gone. So I spoke to these farmers who have stayed in these areas for more than 5 decades. So they've said we'd rather stick with what we've been using, and it's been working. Our families have actually been eating and surviving through using all these methods. Then the other thing also see that there is a deliberate move also institutionally, where you'll find out that there was this belief of saying agricultural extension officers, they are brought into communities to actually help them develop. Yet it was not the case. Those people were put just soon after independence in 1980, but now there is a serious decline. Maybe in a community of more than 20 villages. From 1980 coming down, you see that the number was okay, because one agricultural extension officer will deal maybe with 100 farmers or less. But right now you can find more than 1,000 farmers without even an agricultural extension officer. Those people, where are they going now? Where are they? And if we are talking of sustainable livelihoods for these people, with this decline of the agricultural extension officers, where then are we getting to? So these people now, they are the ones, of course, I had to ask them, I said, okay, so how have you been doing it? And how do you think you can then go forward? They'll be like, we've been doing this, we've been practicing all these systems by ourselves. Of course, it's a privilege to us who are learned to actually know that some of them, they're actually scientific, but they don't even know that. Like, for example, the issue of intercropping that came there of the maize and the beans and all those things. They said it's working. They didn't know anything that it has to do with nitrogen or anything. To them, it's working, and because it's something that they've been told with their grandfathers, and it's working for them, and they'll continue using it instead of depending on the external support.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Well, listening to these three expositions, it occurred to me that, well, they all focus in a way on the state, and concluding that the state is to, or state apparatuses are to play an important role in the further development of agroecology. Yeah, the first paper said that supportive policies are needed. We need more research and development for agroecology. The second one of Moyo said the state should not focus anymore so much on subsidies for improved seeds or modified seeds and chemical fertilizer. The last one well, that it might be doubted whether existing structures will continue and will integrate. They will continue after the project is ended. So all this is very valid, but then of course I think that it's maybe a little bit utopian to think that African states at the moment will engage in such a role to strongly support agroecology. So that raises the question, if this is not the case, or not yet the case, of the state apparatuses fully supporting, what can be done in the meantime? And of course, this is a question meant for everybody.
Yeah, thank you also for the three presentations. The sort of the main gist of what I understood was that that agroecological techniques come into the three settings that you looked at, or more than three in the end, not to replace, mostly, not to replace directly an industrial farming input, but to work alongside it. So then you have this cohabitation of a technique that destroys and a technique that repairs. And just to push a little bit, I mean, when I consider how industrialization has worked in other sectors, it always destroys something, it always alienates people and creates this opposition. Then it does something, the whole process sort of automatically creates its own counter movement to ameliorate this new but actually worse position. And then that counter movement makes it possible to go deeper into the spiral. And then this is how industrialization happened, and now we're all in this really dependent position on all sorts of capitals. And I'm wondering whether on a technical level, agroecology could be seen by, I don't know, the new setup of AGRA or the FAO in a sort of cynical way as this counter movement. You put in a pesticide, new pesticide, the system industrializes a tiny little bit, and then you have to do something to ameliorate it. And then comes an agroecological technique, and then you can go further. But the direction is completely wrong. You know what yeah.
If I may add a couple of small issues. In Ethiopia, I think till about a decade ago or so, there was a very strong push towards industrial agriculture, huge land grabbing. Indian investors were among the largest beneficiaries when your agricultural minister had said that we have all the land, take it, whatever you want to take. Yeah. Has there been a significant change in terms of the nature of the agrarian regime, which sort of facilitates possibly what you think is a slightly more positive, if not significantly more positive, as per your account? Yeah. Of course, I remain skeptical. Incidentally, last year, we published a book, Farming and Working Under Contract, which looks at 3 continents. Elizabeth is one of the contributors in that, Latin America, Africa, and Asia. And most accounts which were looking at either bits and pieces of agroecology, land grabs, and so on and so forth, they seemed to, these are all researchers from these countries, and they were sort of essentially suggesting a very dismal kind of story. Yeah, that things are getting worse and worse. Yeah, what you seem to be suggesting is somewhat different, all 3 of you. Command agriculture, for instance. In that book, there's a piece by Walter Chambati and Freedom. Yeah, Freedom Masvi. Yeah, and they have a very different take. Now, in any case, with respect to Zimbabwe, almost everything is highly debated. So I'm not so sure. I don't work very much directly, yeah, but I read and I keep track of all that. So I just wanted your take on that. Thanks.
I just would like to add one very small question and connect it to how Antonio ended with a quotation on that agroecology, who is not political, is just a hobby garden, as far as I understood in the translation with Louis, So how do you see the practices you have been investigating? Are they counter practices? Are the practices of the villages, the indigenous knowledge, the practicing? Is it something, critical in the sense of political, counter-political? Or is it just the hobby gardening? Or is it on the side of, political, governmental politics? So a little bit,
I got your point.
just go ahead. Where do we end if we take it up? What how we ended in the case of Brazil?
Okay.
Who is next? Ariane?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for my colleagues. Just a general comment. I think it's very important to ask about agroecological transition and for each context or for each country, it is very important to know where for the temporal scale we are in the beginning or in the middle, or we have enough, for example, different innovation and technology. And it's very important to ask about the scale. What is the scale? It is, for example, here we see some success story, for example, for some practices in one region in the country. Because it's very important to succeed this, to think or to think about the upskilling. It's very important. And with a dashboard, I ask about the dashboard to see where is using some indicators. And to success, because in the agroecology, the 13 principle, it's very important to co-design this indicator in order to success. Because, for example, you ask about what is these practices, those indigenous practice. I think it's very important to co-design with the local community in order to success. And my last comment, because here we can discuss maybe for 1 week or 2 weeks about the agroecology. But I think we need to identify some entry point. It's very important to know, maybe, for example, the farmer, and exactly, for example, for soil degradation, and we can build, for example, some different approach about the soil degradation, or, for example, my entry point, it's only, for example, the crop yield or something. It's very important in order to identify or to create my the map or my approach. And thank you.
Question, the role of the state, the ambiguous role of the state, and what can be done in the meantime?
I think I have it, yeah. I should start from history. When fertilizer were introduced, for example, to Ethiopia, farmers were brainwashed that if you use this fertilizer, you can increase production and productivity, and you can give food security. It is a smart technology, accept it and use it and so on. It was broadcasted in the media in such a way that farmers were motivated and so on. It was a supply push rather than demand pull. You know, in economics, we talk about demand and supply. And then people demanded for it because they have got sufficient information about fertilizer. Then they kept on using for decades. And then now, government, which was providing fertilizer with subsidies, the fertilizer cost has increased, and it could not subsidize it anymore. And then experts have also raised concern about the environmental impacts of fertilizer, and farmers also realized that they could not get any yield without fertilizer. Then people start to worry about having access to fertilizer or not is a kind of life and death, because without fertilizer, you cannot grow anymore. So farmers' dependence have increased. So the problem is now how to get out of this, okay? Government cannot supply fertilizer without subsidy, and farmers cannot grow without fertilizer. So what options are there? Okay. So when we talk about agroecology and sustainable agriculture, again, the demand came from the farmer side, that can we get out of this, and then can we produce in the way we used to produce generations ago, and so on. So we have to look at it, at this intervention from this perspective. So it's not just political, but it's just demand-driven, is how to get out of it. And at the same time, you know, in the Western world, we talk about consumers' demand, and consumers' demand is driving production processes, and then they want to have healthy food. But this kind of question is not that much raised among subsistence farmers and urban consumers, even in the context of Africa. All people want is having access to food at a cheaper price. But now there is a move toward this questioning what is happening to something that is produced using fertilizer. You eat food, for example, an hour ago, and then after an hour, then you don't find anything in your stomach. It's just digested completely. Is it because it's produced using fertilizer? It doesn't stay in our stomach. This kind of story that people make usually is just a myth, not a practice as such. So the demand side is driving adoption of agroecological practices. It's not simply a push by the state or by the experts. There is a demand on the ground. So we could say African states are at the stage of promoting sustainable agriculture. And that is also very much related to climate change, because when we talk about agroecology, agroecology should also enable us to tackle some of the problems that are caused by climate change. It is within that framework that I tried to conclude that there is a need to realign policies along with climate change adaptation, where we talk about enhancing water security, for example, responding to climate shocks like droughts and so on. Is it replacing? I think still the question that farmers raise is increasing production and productivity and responding to challenges posed by climate change. If agroecological practices are capable of helping farmers achieve this target, then why not replacing? Why not replacing? There's no need to argue about that. And the other question is about, I think, FDI with respect to agriculture of India. I think that was really devastating. It's very much devastating because government allocate land to those investors where agriculture is not anymore productive. The areas that have been used by pastoralists were given for production of rice. And what FDI brought to Ethiopia is environmental degradation. It's very difficult to use that land for any other purpose by smallholders or small herders. After the FDI, the land became even abundant. So it increases ecological fragility. It is simply based on the goodwill of maybe Ethiopian investment commissions that they provide this kind of land in marginal areas, in lowland areas, which is suitable for something else rather than agriculture. So that is against the agroecology principles, because we have to take into consideration the suitability of land, the suitability of resources for which you put into different kinds of investment. We need to have alternative land use policies, alternative land use systems in the country. But that was really unsustainable, completely devastating. Is it a gardening practice or is it something which is politically supported? Of course, if we take into consideration the PSNP program, which is financed by the World Bank, operating in Ethiopia on a large scale, where smallholder farmers, very poor smallholder farmers, are targeted, it is just a political move because government is trying to organize communities into groups, and those groups are contributing labor in conservation of hilly areas by planting trees, establishing enclosure, and then keeping from entrance of animals and people to cut trees and so on. That is operating on a wider scale. It is field cycle. Each cycle is taking about 3 to 4 years, so something that is very productive. And its impact has been assessed already by some scholars, and they indicated already that the yield of those farmers have increased by 2.3% after they got involved in PSNP program. So it is promising. It is state-driven. Also, the support is coming from the donors. I think that is covering a large area in Ethiopia. So many farmers are benefiting from it. Okay. On the last question, are we at the beginning or in the middle? I think someone raised from here. I think maybe I think we are just starting, really. It's not more than a decade since we realized that this move toward sustainable agriculture is more promising in terms of protecting the environment and lifting people out of poverty and so on. It's an alternative way of thinking. Thank you.
Yes.
Okay.
Very, very brief.
Brief, yeah.
Okay, all right. So on the role of the state and what can be done, you'll find out that with Zimbabwe, it's a different situation in the sense that the state is now hijacking some of these activities that have been actually going on. Like, for example, there is an issue of dry planting that have been used by people long back, but now it is the ruling party's mantra, to an extent that those people who actually do not know that that thing existed way back, they always think that it's the ruling party that is actually helping them. Yet it's a practice that has already been in existence. Then in terms of agroecology being an attack to industrialization, no, that's not the case. Maybe, I think, can I say it was a blessing in disguise or what? That most of these rural communities here, they were not even exposed. They are not exposed to some of these chemicals. Some of them, they don't even afford them. So to them, they then depend on what they have, and they use that, and it's been working for them. Then in terms of the scale of where we are now, I think Zimbabwe as a country, if all parties sit down, I think we're almost halfway, from my own understanding, because these things have already been in existence, and right now you see that all these people are coming in. They are coming in trying to capacitate all those things that already have been there. In terms of the, as I already alluded to, the issue of the dry planting, it's something that was already there, and the government is coming in to support on that. Most of the NGOs that are coming into the area, of course, they are coming saying that they are teaching people on how to do these things, but they've already been doing it. Maybe they can come in, maybe some other things, like for example, now the area that I'm working on, they are having difficulties in terms of water. Maybe if an organization, an institution comes, maybe drill a bore, a solar powered bore, then you say, practice what you have been practicing, instead of bringing all the alternatives. The challenge that is there now, find out an NGO will come, they'll say, okay, this is a community garden, this is your bore, but you are planting this in this way, which is not right. I think it needs to be addressed in that manner.
Thank you. Yes. Suwilanji, do you want to add something?
Yeah, maybe a quick one to add on what my two colleagues have shared. I think I would just want to talk on the issue of scale. A lot of African countries have, like I said in my presentation, have been practicing agroecology by default, but maybe just the nomenclature. I think agroecology and the policy environment, which is basically politics, they are intertwined. If you want to bring it up to scale, because then we cannot, it is being practiced, but then there is no political will that to make it, to bring it up to scale. So if you want to bring it to scale, we need political will. We need the politicians to bring about that good policy environment that promote agroecological practices. That's the only way that will bring this practice to scale. So I think that's my small contribution. Thank you.